bar cookies and bottles of water. Help yourself. And we want to thank Matt, I'm sorry I have a sore throat, Matt Frey for coming. He is a senior civil engineer with the County of Los Angeles, and he's going to be presenting. I'll have a presentation, and then there'll be a Q&A time afterwards. Just remember, messenger, no murdering the messenger. So I know everyone has a lot of questions, but we will be polite, kind, and welcoming. And I will leave it to you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you, really, to the community. I know it's a topic of interest for everybody to some degree. And as mentioned, I'm here to share really an overview about the program, the process, the next steps. I want to make sure that you've got kind of the basic understanding of how we got to where we're at and what it all looks like. But very much make sure that we answer some questions, or if I can't answer the question, I'll make sure we take a note and represent it. We do have a member from our board offices here as well, so thank you, Nicole. Wonderful to be here. But really, want to make sure that you guys get the right information. So I've also brought a set of flyers. There's 3 different handouts up here on the table, so they kind of focus on different topics. We'd love for you to take one of those too. It'll just serve as a reminder. It's got our it's got our email address, it's got other things as well. Then I've got cards too if you want to follow up directly after this. That'll be at the end of the slide. But I was talking to actually Susan and a few others coming up here about this. Really been my first time out in Agua Dulce, and it's beautiful. I really like it already. I'm not a native of California, and so it's a beautiful break to get out here. So I do want to touch briefly on, again, the history of where we got to this point, actually. And so you may be familiar with 1 to 5 of all these types of challenges. Water resiliency is a term that gets thrown out a lot these days. It's something that the County Board of Supervisors has really taken a leadership role in for a number of years now. And looking for resilience, you really need to step forward and say, okay, what are all different challenges in trying to get it set up? So whether it's climate change, our reliance on imported water, pollutions, and all its different forms, there was really a focused effort to say, how can we actually put together a broad regional program that will help mitigate some of these issues? You're also probably aware that it went to the ballots. It was passed at the County Board of Supervisors last July, which put it on the ballot in November of 2018. There was really 3 main goals, and there still are 3 main goals to the program. It's to really, in a meaningful way, improve water quality, increase local water supplies, enhance communities. And it's all centered around stormwater. A lot of times the name safe clean water gets misinterpreted with drinking water, perhaps. And stormwater can, be treated and eventually become drinking water. But this is a stormwater capture program going after those 3 goals. So it's capturing stormwater, cleaning stormwater, conserving stormwater, and everything that goes with it. It was passed by almost 70% of the voters near the end of last year, and that's what's brought us to where we're at today. So I want to give you a high-level overview again on what we've got, set to date, and then what will still get set. And like I mentioned to a couple of you guys, I'm aware of some of the concerns that have been expressed up here. We can certainly talk more to those. I'll try to highlight a few things during the presentation, but also would love to take note of additional concerns, other questions, concerns, that kind of thing. So there are 3 pots of money that this tax revenue goes to serve. There's the regional program, which is 50%, and that one almost operates like a mini grant program in a sense, where people will come and say, here's what the region needs to become more water resilient. It's going to have some water quality, water supply, and or community enhancement benefits to go with it. The municipal program, the yellow 40% pie, is the local return. So any city gets that much of their revenue that's collected in their boundaries directly back, again, to accomplish the program goals. Interesting to note, Agua Dulce and other unincorporated LA County communities are included as a municipality. So across the county, within the flood control district, unincorporated areas are getting their municipal return as well. And then the 10% is really for a variety of things. It's the education type programs, workforce reinvestment for how do we create jobs that are related to this type of thing. But it also covers the administration of the program itself and some of the flood control district projects. And I put on the right-hand side here really what the big target is right now. The November election had an ordinance. It was the first piece of code defining what this program was. And it pointed towards towards August 1st as a deadline to have the second piece of code in place. And that basically is being called an implementation ordinance. It's got a due date of August 1st. And right now we're targeting July 30th, where this next set of code will come before the board for consideration and eventually adoption. So everything we're talking about here, a lot of it has been established already by what was voted in November, and I'll try to highlight any of the things that are just, kind of the minor clarifications where we're filling in the gaps for this August 1st ordinance. I guess I would point out the grand total revenue from this program could be up to $300 million. That's again based on the tax revenue itself at 2.5 cents per square foot of impermeable area. So I know there is some concern about just how is that tax really applied and calculated. The LA County Land Cover Survey is really just the fancy word for the aerial imaging that is used to help determine whether it's concrete or something that is permeable and lets the water soak into the ground. So this is just a sample of kind of what it identifies. You can tell from that imagery whether there's vegetation, soil, structures, pavement, other types of things as well. And the computers are able to calculate the resulting impermeable area. So if it's just 10 square feet times the 2.5 cents, it's just a simple, easy mathematical equation. It really is just multiplying it by 2.5 cents to calculate the tax per parcel. I think it's really noteworthy to highlight a couple of these neat features of the program. While it applies to the entire flood control district boundary minus Antelope Valley, there are other ways to get exemptions, credits, and appeals within the program. So on the front end, that would have an impact to the tax and obviously the revenue. If you can't read what's under exemptions, there's a few of these categories that are just kind of built in up front. It's again like the government-owned parcels, things that are already exempt through ad valorem taxes. But the last bullet there is the low-income senior-owned parcels. And so what's out right now for a public review period, and this I'll highlight as well as we go through, but there's now a form where if you meet the low-income household requirements and are age 65 or over, you can be completely exempted from the tax. There's also credits, and that's an opportunity for anybody that already has certain types of best management practices, certain types of things already on their parcel, or if you choose to add it to your parcel, they will earn you a credit for your tax. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail on those as well, but you can get tax credits in different categories. If it's serving water quality purposes, if it's serving water supply purposes, or if it's serving community enhancement purposes. And then the last one is appeals. And so if there's a significant error, it's actually an option to appeal that tax. And so there's an online program that's currently available as well that is just a user-friendly, where you get to trace the boundaries of your parcel and submit that to see if it's an eligible appeal for the tax as well. So this is something that's neat. There's a lot of other taxes, measures, and things that have been out there. We're not aware of any that has all three of these now built into the core of the program itself. And we can certainly provide more information on any of these. As interested, we're here to help as well. We know a lot of those who may want to pursue the low-income senior exemption may not have access to a computer. So we've got hard copy forms. We will facilitate that. If somebody wants it mailed, we will mail that. We will provide assistance as well to help complete that process. But what's currently proposed is, like I said, a minimum age of 65, and then using the state's low-income household data. And there's a couple of draft documents out there for review. So if you're interested in reading through the nitty-gritty of it, it's really just a one-page form and a one-page instruction sheet that goes with this. But I can make sure you have the link for that as well. It's currently on the webpage. But this is a neat tool that again we want to make as accessible as possible. The credit program that I mentioned has a bunch of different categories. You can see these in the colored boxes. Compared to what everybody saw back when this was brought to the board and then to the public for the vote, there's only been a little bit of refinement here. There was a couple categories at the time that just said, hey, these need to be further refined and defined. And so at this point, we've done so. The community investment side and also the additional activities. It was kind of just saying, hey, we'll figure out what that is. Now the new ordinance that's going to come in July 30th has actually defined, hey, here's the ways that you can also achieve a credit for additional types of activities on your parcel. This, again, we want it to be as user-friendly as possible. There's going to be online, easy-to-use, user-friendly applications. You can test that out right now on a computer if you so wish as well. But these are things that, again, are going to hit the ground running right alongside with the actual tax showing up on your bills. So in both cases, the first year is unique. The way that the schedule has been laid out is it's a unique first year case where you'll see it on your first year tax bill, whether it's a low income senior or a credit itself, you'll see it and you'll end up getting a rebate for it once it's approved and deemed as a qualifying application. Every year going forward, to use a low income senior for example, if that is deemed approved, it's not even going to show up on your tax bills. It will be a zero line item. Again, there's documentation on our webpage that walks you through step by step what that process would look like, how do you submit an application, what are the requirements for it, and we can certainly talk more about that as well. And then, like I said, the third component that affects an individual's tax itself is the appeals process. So there's an online tutorial right now, and again, a user-friendly interface that can help you craft what your appeal could be. And so, again, credits, exemptions, and appeals, all three kind of critical pieces to the tax itself. And then this timeline, I recognize may not be readable on the wall here, but let me highlight a couple of pieces of it. We passed, the voters passed it in November of 2018, and then there are a few key deadlines coming up now that this has been set in motion. The auditor controller for the county finalizes the tax roll in August. So that's around the corner. That's when the first data sets from all the area imagery will be applied. And then the tax bills go out in early October. So it shows up in everybody's mailboxes. You'll see a line now that says Safe Clean Water that will reference this program. Like always, there's two due dates with 2 installments of the tax bill. And as that revenue comes trickling in, it's really in the spring of 2020 that the first set of revenue will be available for all the communities to now start engaging, deciding, spending to meet the needs of each region. And then that cycle repeats on an annual basis. So whether it's $300 million or whatever it is after all the credits, taxes, and appeals, it's an annual process where that starts to be dispersed around the spring of each subsequent year. So we talked about all the pieces of it that kind of affect an individual's tax. And then we've already mentioned that the grand revenue could be about $300 million. I've also already highlighted there's a 50%, a 40%, and a 10%. This chart just breaks it down and shows that in the 10% there's these three programs that come out of it: the schools education, the public education, and the local workforce job training. So that could be up to $6 million annually. It's basically about 20% of that 10% piece of the pie. It's something that is geared again to be an entire region-wide beneficial program. You can also see how the 50% is broken down. We can go into that if you'd like as well. But for that regional program, it's really designed to get new projects in the ground. That's the bulk of the funding. But it also supports technical resources. If there was someone in Agua Dulce or anywhere else that felt like they didn't have the means to prepare a feasibility study that would be required for such a project, LA County will actually make available an engineering team and all all the other expertise that might be needed for a given project, and actually help craft that feasibility study so it can be brought to the steering committees and considered for implementation. So it's a neat piece of the program. It's something that we're eager to kind of partner with everybody, hear those ideas, brainstorm together, and then bring it forth for consideration. So this is just another look, that same 10%. Like I said, it's across the whole district. We've already talked about all those pieces of what it serves. I want to pause on the regional and the municipal. That's the 50% and the 40%. On the left-hand side is the 50%. And if you're not familiar with how the regional side was split up, it's worth noting that there are 9 watershed areas. Again, this is the flood control district boundaries. It's the vast majority of the county. It ends about Avenue S. But within those 9 watershed areas, it's just like the local municipal program. 50% of the tax that's collected in those boundaries goes back to those boundaries. So the watershed areas are defined based on topography. Where's the water going to flow? And Agua Dulce is in the Santa Clara River. That's what I have highlighted here. So you can see the anticipated revenue that would come to this region on an annual basis is about $7 million. That $7 million, and we'll talk more about this, the way that it gets spent is going to start with the recommendation of a steering committee dedicated to just the Santa Clara River. And on the right-hand side, the 40% goes back to each city or municipality. Like I mentioned, this being unincorporated county, unincorporated county as a whole will get about $12 million on an annual basis. So the funding that is anticipated to be invested into this region is first $7 million to the regional side and about $12 million in the unincorporated side. So unincorporated, obviously, that's scattered across county area, but Santa Clara, you guys all know Nearly and Dearly, that's going to come back here directly to the watershed. And the only thing you need to note on this one, this big map with all the colors on the left-hand side, it just shows the boundaries of the 9 watershed areas. So we could zero in on that with anybody that's interested. But obviously Santa Clara is the one on the top left. You can see the pink is the city of Santa Clarita. And then what you see on the right is a flow chart that shows really just the sequence of approval. So what's going to happen with your tax dollars once it's received? It's going to be allotted to the given watershed area, which is Santa Clara. And this is just the 9 boxes. All 9 of those watershed areas are going to go through the same process. They all share a governance committee structure. So they're going to generate what's called a stormwater investment plan. It's just like any of us who have created a budget on what we want to do with our money. That's the group who says, we think our region needs X, Y, and Z. We think that the projects that are going to get us X, Y, and Z are these. And they're literally going to write it out in what's called a stormwater investment plan. And it has an annual budget that's set up, and it gets recommended to what's called a regional oversight committee. That's the blue box in the middle there. And those guys, in turn, recommend it to the county board of supervisors. So again, every expense is ultimately vetted in the regional program through the county board of supervisors. Once they approve it, that's when we would go back and now issue the funds to all those that are receiving it. So the city, an agency, an individual, an NGO, nonprofits, partnerships, whatever it may look like, if they have been recommended funding and then approved through the board, we'll make sure we transfer those funds accordingly. Oh, and then I put up here too, I just wanted to pause on the structure of that committee that decides where the funding goes. Every single one of those committees has 17 members. So for Santa Clara, it's just the same. There's 17 governing members. There are 7 seats dedicated to municipalities. So in this particular watershed, you have Santa Clarita and unincorporated LA County as the big municipalities. You have 5 agency seats to go with those 7 municipalities. So that's the Flood Control District, Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency. There's a Groundwater Sustainability Agency for the Santa Clara River Valley. There's the County Sanitation Districts, and then the city's Parks and Rec Division. So that's 12 now, and then the last 5 go to community stakeholder seats. So collectively, those community stakeholder seats are going to be representing the community interests. There's a business seat, there's an environmental seat, an environmental justice seat, and there's 2 at-large seats. And so collectively, those 17 members will gather and again, run through that same exercise. What's going to be the best for our region? How do we accomplish these program goals? And what recommendations do we want to outline for the board to actually consider? So it's got a very diverse representation. It's something that I think is going to really ensure, everything is thought about. And every time that those committees meet will be a public meeting. So anybody who's not sitting on it but has an interest in this cause or an interest in the projects, or just simply wants to share information that could inform the process, is encouraged to attend those meetings. So after we go through this process in July to settle the committees and the ordinance that I mentioned, these committees could start meeting as early as late August, September, and carry on through the rest of this year to make sure that we have some of those decisions on the recommended funding before the spring comes when the revenue is actually available. And I was mentioning to Lillian actually that there's some of these documents that help spell out the details of this currently out for public review. So I'm going to make sure that she gets that. If anyone else has not seen that and wants to, please make sure I've got your email, your phone number. The period has been ongoing for about 3.5 weeks already, and it's actually slated to end tomorrow. And so I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to still see these. And like I said, I'll take any concerns even today from the meeting just to make sure that we've got record of it. I can share that, we can consider it. But the vast majority of what these documents are is really just a reiteration of putting it in the code from what accompanied last year's ballot measure and ordinance language. So it was already defined 90% or so, and now it's just being put into the code. And like I mentioned, there's a few places where it just clarified the details. But we just want to make sure that now that these documents that kind of spell out how it happens, the execution process, the actual forms if you want to apply for anything, those are the aspects that are currently out, and we certainly welcome and looking for comments on those. If you can't read this in the back, I'll just highlight the documents that are out right now. is the implementation ordinance. Again, that's the law, that's the code that I mentioned that is really just kind of codifying what was voted on. Number 2 and number 3 is related to the credit program. So again, that's if you have an improvement on your property that helps capture stormwater and accomplishes the goals of the program, that's where you can get a tax reduction. Numbers 4 and number 5 are the low-income senior exemption procedures and guidelines, which is the instruction, and then also the form that goes with it. Number 6 is the tax appeals process tutorial. They would walk a user through how that process would happen. And then number 7 is something we haven't touched on here. It's the feasibility study requirements. In short, it's just the playbook for anybody that is looking to submit an idea for funding. It tells you this is the minimum thing that you need to think about. And it says you need to go out and talk to your communities and see if they think it's a good idea. It says you need to consider all these different aspects. You need to have these calculations, basically have all your ducks in a row before the committees can consider a project. So this is a really neat tool to make sure that somebody doesn't just come in with an agenda or a half-baked project. Instead, they get to come before the committee, all standardized with a minimum set of requirements that will then be considered fairly across that committee, the same group of 17 that I mentioned earlier. Number 8 is the Watershed Area Steering Committee Operating Guidelines. That just means, hey, this is how that committee of 17 people, this is how they're going to work together. So if you're interested in how they're going to sit down and what the order of those meetings look like, those kind of things, that's the document that will spell some of that out. And then the Watershed Coordinator Scope of Work is an important one to mention. I didn't highlight yet what the Watershed Coordinator does, but recall there are 9 watershed areas, and each one of those watershed areas has at least one watershed coordinator. And their job, again, is to make sure that there is good discussion with the community. Once these coordinators are hired to serve those watershed areas, they're going to be a liaison between the steering committees, any community-based organizations, directly with the public, any other interested entities that want to be a part of that process. And their job is really to go back and forth and make sure that there's a good understanding both directions and that there's technical assistance provided to those that want it, that the right project ideas are brought before the committee, and so forth. So that one kind of gives you just a high-level snapshot of what a watershed coordinator does. So I know it sounds like a lot, but again, a lot of it is just fleshing out a little bit of detail from the things that were already voted on in November. I don't think we need to pause on this, but this is just, if you're interested in the legal side of things, the Flood Control Act amendments. What was voted on before is called Chapter 16 of the Flood Control Act. What will be voted on in July is called Chapter 18 of the Flood Control Act. So kind of hand in hand, it's those 2 chapters that will really define how the program as a whole will not just be set up like it was now, but also then driven forward and all that. So it's going to be adopted again by August 1st. That was the goal that was spelled out in that first Chapter 16. And like I said, we're going to go before the board seeking that adoption July 30th. In case we're tracking it during the development phase, there was a document on the right-hand side, had that blue box across the top, said Safe Clean Water Program Elements. Again, that was the document that was considered last year that spelled out a lot of the framework that then has now just been put into the code. A lot of these other details too that I just talked about, we'll go back to this one. A lot of the other details, the credit program, the instructions for low-income seniors, a lot of those things actually now are at least proposed to be housed external to the code. It gives flexibility to everybody involved in some sense because we recognize it's a brand new program. There's a lot to be learned. We think there's a lot to be gained from it and need to get it going. We think we've got a great start on it. But with that flexibility, having these external, it actually is something we're able to continue to engage stakeholders, continue to ask for input, continue to see, okay, here's other things we need to consider based on how the program is working after it's first set up. So I will stop jabbering in a minute, but the last slide is the timeline. And this, again, can be broken down simply. I'll lay it out for you. The pink bar across the top is July 2019 through March 2020. So on the left-hand side, you're looking at present day. This is where we almost stand. We're getting close to July. And so we've already talked about the green category. That's the revenue. First in August, it's when that tax roll is submitted. That's the final numbers that you'll see on your tax bill. It gets mailed in October, and then come the spring, we anticipate having the ability to actually distribute those funds. The yellow bar is the municipal program. That's the one, again, that comes back to the cities or to the county unincorporated. And there's a couple of key things that will come up for that. And again, I want to make sure that anybody who is not is on our distribution email list, or if you don't have email, make sure that you let us know. We can inform you some other ways as best possible. But there's something called a fund transfer agreement. I alluded to that earlier. That's the mechanism that shows, okay, City A is going to get this much money to spend on a project, or this potential project developer is going to get this much money. They're not going to get that money until signing the transfer agreement. And there's still another anticipated public review period for that document coming up this fall. So that's the opportunity where it says, okay, anybody that receives the money, again, they need to think about these things. It's going to reinforce the fact that they need to meet all the minimum requirements, that they're going to have to report on how it's measurably meeting the goals of the program. They're going to be subject to audits. All these things, they really enforce the accountability of the program. It also makes sure that everybody who's involved is stewarding the public funds in a responsible fashion. A really important part of it. And those transfer agreements also apply again to the regional program. So you'll see both of them with a chance to actually share input on those. The blue bar is again the regional program. The regional is that 50% of the funding. And you can see here in August the committee formations. That's again when the 17 members that I talked about who will make the first recommendation for spending the money. Those names will be identified at that July 30th board hearing. Shortly after that, there will be the call for projects. Those that are interested in sharing their ideas would need to respond to the call for projects, bring it to that committee. There will be a scoring committee who helps everybody decide and measure up against those different benefits within the program. They'll be able to say, yes, this project meets the water quality goals, or here's how it meets the water supply goals, or here's how it provides a community enhancement. And then you can see the ROC on there, that's the regional oversight. Again, that's the intermediary step that is providing oversight to all 9 of the watershed areas. They will look at it, again, see if it's consistent with program goals. Their job also is to have a pulse of the stakeholders and other interests, and then they make a recommendation to the board, again, with that investment plan to say, yes, this is something we think meets the program goals, and then of course transfer the money. The gray one at the bottom is a lot of just the district activities. I talked about how we're going to the board before. I talked about the watershed coordinators. That's a position that will actually be solicited out there for interested people to apply for. The county will, the board of supervisors will go back to them seeking adoption of those transfer agreements sometime in the fall. And then all those education programs, whether it's the schools, jobs, we hope to launch those around the end of the year as well, to make sure that all of these things are going hand in hand, making sure that education goes with the infrastructure development and vice versa, so that everything is really progressing towards what we actually need kind of at the same time. So that's the last official slide. I've got others we can pull up, potentially based on questions if needed. Like I said, we've got some flyers over here. Really, we do want to hear and try to address some of the concerns that you guys have. The ones that I'm aware of up front relate to the impermeable areas, the way that it drains and that kind of stuff. So I'll let you formulate it, and I would love to hear the additional concerns. Anything else you have to say, I'll do my very best to speak to it, and I'll take it back if I can't. So I'm sorry.
You mentioned 17 people. Are those paid people?
They are not paid people.
So the only one that's paid is the coordinator?
The watershed coordinator is the paid position, who's really going to be, essentially an equivalent full-time position, liaising, and then all of those committee members will be, depending on the needs, might meet 8 times a year potentially, as needed to make sure that they get all their decisions made. And there is a provision that allows someone who may not have a paying job otherwise to have a $100 stipend for attending those meetings. So if there's a case there and they certify that their employer will not pay them to go and sit over there, then they will be eligible for that $100, so up to $800 a year for attending those meetings. Yep.
To follow up on that question, the coordinator, they hired him, is it going to be a local person out at regional? Because we tend to have a problem when we have city folks making decisions for rural areas. They don't seem to grasp what life is out here.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, that's a really important part of the watershed coordinator role. when we solicit that, they're gonna need to certify which watershed area they think they represent. And a big part of their qualifications is, you know, are they engaged in the communities? Do they know the needs, the interests, the nuances that represent those communities? And so there might be somebody who applies for all 9, but certainly when we screen them at the first level, it's gonna be people who are connected to those communities.
But they won't be required to live in that community.
They aren't necessarily required to live there, but I think it certainly helps to understand.
I would say it's essential, because you may be academically set for the job, but like I said, you don't understand rural areas unless you live in one.
Yes, I understand. I'm gonna make a few notes as we talk here. All right, and then I saw another hand up, I think, as well. Yeah.
For those in the area who have their own wells, are they being taxed like everybody else?
Yeah, it's the water supply issue doesn't have a direct correlation to this because it's not directly, you know, impacted or impacting where when you turn on your tap where the water comes from. It's all stormwater related. So it basically, well or not, as the rainfall comes down, it's all about capturing that rainwater and putting it to use, leveraging it in the county.
And where gravel is put down to help, you know, with the soil so water doesn't sit, it allows absorption. Is that a benefit or is that a higher tax?
That's not a higher tax. That allows the water to soak in the ground. And I think one of the issues one of the questions that I come across related to that same topic was, you know, what if there's a portable storage container or things like that are covering otherwise permeable ground? And again, since they're blocking that portion of the ground, those are counted as taxable. But something like gravel, where it's able to still soak in, would not. Yeah, we'll go back to Celeste.
I think we spoke about that a little bit. So
Okay.
there are several people who have like cargo containers
Yeah.
and sheds.
Yep.
And all of those items will be taxed, is that correct?
Correct. So the patio that I have in my backyard, which is just covering grass, anything that is preventing the rain from directly soaking into the ground will be taxed.
And how are they going to compute the square footage of all of those items? Is it going to be aerial?
Yeah, so it's aerial. It goes back to what we talked about up front here. This LA County land cover survey is the aerial imagery that is used. And so it's gone through a lot of studies. It's been something that's proven to be very accurate compared to all other known data sources for it. But in case there were errors, that's why the appeal process is built into things as well. And then we recognize that, you know, that might change as well. So periodically, there's an opportunity to get an updated snapshot in time as needed to redo that data set. But if something happens intermittently as well, then you can come to us through the credits, the appeals, just to make sure that it gets updated correctly.
And what is that aerial photo as of what date?
When's the current one that's being used? I think it's dated just from last year, 2018. Yeah, I'll double check that.
So
Yeah, we'll go in the back here.
the cargo sheds that we have, you know, they're up on skids, so water runs underneath them, so that does still, we're gonna be taxed on that anyway.
It's the same for, again, like the patio in my backyard that's covered, it's 10 feet above grass. The water very much will run underneath it, but the rainfall is prevented from hitting it. Yeah. behind it.
Right, so you're saying that any shed, any horse awning, right? Anything that comes down and then say the water runs down, it runs into my arena, which soaks in. It doesn't run down the road, right? So I'm gonna be taxed on every horse awning, every little shed, or every bigger shed on the whole property.
Yeah, again, so there's a nuance between, you know, a runoff program versus the impermeable area. And as much as, you know, everybody's here, I think, understands, yes, the runoff can travel different places, but it's based on the impermeable area as the primary mechanism for the tax. And that does put some of these types of cases in.
So the arena is not a permeable area.
The arena is.
It is.
I mean,
But it is, but
That's
so.
dirt and sand.
If it's dirt and sand, it's not
As long as it
taxed.
doesn't have a cover.
Correct.
As long as it doesn't have a cover on it.
Right.
Yep.
Is the aerial view going to be able to distinguish between solid concrete and, say, pavers, which are permeable?
Yeah, and there's been a lot of tests of those to show that in most cases it will, but in any case where there's concern about it, we'll certainly look at that as well.
So you have to go and appeal if you have permeable interlocking pavers that the water soaks in. And if they start taxing you on that, you have to go through this entire appeal process.
Well, as a default, we're saying that anything that is permeable like those should not be taxed. If somehow the imagery didn't pick it up properly, it would be the appeal process to fix it.
And how are we going to know exactly what they're picking up and what they're not?
Again, I know it's tricky. There's not a published data set for it aside from what this imagery has. So we can, this image is, a public data set itself, but the square footage calculation itself, it isn't. And so it's going to be one of those things where if you doubt it, if there's concern, you contact us again and we'll help.
And would somebody come out and reassess personally, or you're gonna send another drone out to take pictures?
No drones in this case. It's all existing data sets from existing satellites and so forth. And when needed, we would have somebody come out. Part of our process, again, for accountability and stewardship is periodic site visits for whether it's credit programs or others. So we will have people who go out for that purpose, and if needed, we hope to have the resources also to come out as well. But a lot of these programs, the credit program, for instance, when you're trying to recertify that and get your tax credit, you're going to be able to just submit pictures, and then people might come out to spot check it. We haven't come up here yet.
Just wondering, since I think almost everybody has a slope to their roof, the water's gonna run off anyway. I'm wondering about the case where you also have gutters and they're being diverted to run out into the lawn. Seems to me that's permeable. The water's all being collected, running out where you want it to go.
Yeah, same issue if it's running underneath the elevated storage structures and everything as well. That's going to apply to a lot of cases. And again, it's just not the nature of how the tax was first developed. I think we have got everybody. We'll start here. Yeah, go ahead.
Two questions. If you have a water tank, is that considered taxable then?
If it's
You have your own wells
a-
in the tank?
covered hardscape that is obstructed.
Well, it has to be, it's a completely enclosed structure.
Yeah.
So you're being taxed for your own water tank. Okay,
You're being taxed for anything that is not permitted.
fascinating how creative you guys are. Now, does this go into all of Los Angeles, like in the San Fernando Valley, you're gonna get these kinds of taxes
Yeah.
also?
So obviously in the city, there's way more hardscape than out in areas like Agua Dulce, so the taxes will be higher there. But the opportunities for the credits and exemptions is uniform across all the district boundaries. But they're dealing with the same things. It's a district-wide tax.
Well, I do commend the city for how creative they are in drawing more money out of it. This is amazing.
We'll go to the back corner here.
I have a couple concerns. I disagree with you about the tax being higher in the city, so it's like, I have more permeable surfaces technically, my horse things than what I had when I was in the city with my easement going through the middle of the street. But my other thing is, concern would be of those water districts where the watershed is, Santa Clara goes to Ventura. Now, if we're affecting Ventura's downstream run, are they gonna be able to come back and tell us, no, we can't do projects?
So the Santa Clara River is unique. There's the upper and the lower, and lower is actually part of Ventura. But the mapping, there's actually a part. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the Regional Water Board, the regulatory agency for water quality. But a lot of the pursuits for compliance fall underneath these watershed management programs or enhanced watershed management programs. And so Santa Clara has one of those themselves as well, and there's been a lot of studies to kind of confirm the direction of the runoff, where it goes, which parts of it flow, and that's one of the primary reasons why Agua Dulce is included versus something like Antelope Valley.
Well, the question is I have friends that farm in the Heritage Valley, right through Santa Clara. They draw off the Santa Clara underground water, which is replenished by way of the Santa Clara River runoff. If we are taking water reclamation projects in Los Angeles County and taking away their ability to do their business, are they gonna be able to come back to Los Angeles and Santa Clara River watershed specifically, the upper shed, and say, hey, you can't do that because you're taking away our livelihood?
So you're looking more at water rights issues, it sounds like.
It's more or less a water rights issue because it's all underground, so what's comes through permeable here, particularly through that watershed
Yep.
and through that riverbed,
Yep.
soaks into the ground and they use it downstream.
Right. Yeah, it's an important consideration, no doubt, and it's complicated throughout the whole county, even more so in certain areas of it as well. But that's why each of those 17-member committees have a groundwater agency represented there, the largest ones. And so up here, it's the Groundwater Sustainability Agency that the state had formed recently through their SIGMA program. But those types of agencies, in conjunction with the water masters and others, will be some of the key parties will help look at that. What are the impacts? If you're taking water that would otherwise go somewhere else, that's still going to be considered into the process.
And environmental studies for these water reclamations and water feasibility things, how stringent are they going to be? Because some of our old water reclamations in the San Fernando Valley were closed up because of people suing for that reason, because they were claiming it was polluting the groundwater or something like that. So some of those reclamation ponds were paved over literally, and San Fernando Valley had a huge number of those 50 years ago.
So the question is,
How are the environmental studies going to be from the water agency, from our end of it, on the water agency to be able to not have to worry about being sued by an environmental group for destructing something to do with the watershed?
Okay, I see. I think you're just getting at the complexity of the whole issue. That those committees have a heavy burden on them for sure, to look at all the considerations, what is not just the best needs, but how are the right ways to get it. Obviously, nobody's going to be looking for a lawsuit regardless, but ultimately, it's designed to work together, not to take someone else's water, not to infringe upon any other rights. And then there's a number of other questions still, but it reminded me also I know everybody's still really concerned about a hardscape, even if there's room for the water to flow. And one of the big things that's I think worth noting still is supply-wise, maybe most of that water can run underneath something and still soak into the ground, but it's rare for all of it to soak in still. And so from the water quality side, it's still a very real consideration. Agua Dulce may have different pollutants than other parts of the county, but again, those EWIMP studies related to the regional board have documented the type of pollutants that still run off, whether it's underneath a shed, underneath a water tank, those types of aspects can still carry pollutants into the Santa Clara River and still be therefore addressed and cleaned up through the program. So we haven't gone back here yet.
The credit idea, how do we get the credit? I know that in other, like in Germany, you're supposed to have catch basins. You're required to have catch basins in certain rural areas. How do you get credit? I would love to have a catch basin. I have plenty of room to catch some rainwater before you stop tax.
Right. I did not know that about Germany.
Yes.
But a lot of cities, unincorporated county, various areas have what's called low impact development ordinances. It's the exact type of thing that it says really for new developments, they kind of build that in up front. And so for something that's already established, the credit system is built to say, okay, if you match what those standards were as if it was being built new, and it achieves those benefits, so it's called LID, low impact development. If you meet those standards or exceed those standards, you can get 65% or 75% of your tax credit right away.
Would that be removing hardscape and putting in rock, or what standard are we talking about?
So I could actually provide some detail on the county one, which I think applies up here, for everybody to kind of peruse, and certainly we can follow up on it, but it depends based on whose jurisdiction it is. So it's not necessarily just pulling out something. it usually is, it could be something as simple as rain barrels, but it often means, you know, types of vegetated swales that, you know, are still unique compared to just your grass or your soil. It's really intended now, whether through an actual physical depression, to capture that water and route it in a different way. So there's a number of different ways. I think there's going to be a lot of interest from the engineering firms to help people figure out those if interested in putting those onto their lots. And again, that water quality aspect, you can get 65 or 75% up front. And then if you have something water supply related and a community investment benefit that goes on top of it, and these other ones, you can still build that credit up to 100%.
So who do I talk to? How do I get specific information? Because it's specific to this area. I can start planting vegetative swales.
I'll be your starting point for now. I mean, once the steering committees are in order, I think there's going to be the watershed coordinators and the other education programs and others that will really help relay that information. Since they don't exist yet, I'll funnel that through for now. So again, make sure I got your info as well.
Yes, it would be good to see a list of improvements that homeowners could do to start getting those credits. My guesses would be things like, replace a sidewalk with pavers or a gravel walkway. Maybe put drains in your driveway as opposed to replacing the whole thing with gravel. That's hard to maintain if you're not
Right.
couple guesses.
Yeah, like I said, I'll try to, and even, you know, if you wouldn't mind just helping to distribute to the community at large, I think it's again another resource. Anybody that we can give information to, if you can share it, it will be helpful.
Oh, you bet. I'll share it. Can I?
I haven't gone back here.
You stated earlier that for the regional program, that there's going to be a possible audit of the way they spend their money. Is it define possible? Because we saw what happened with the bullet train when left alone. They wasted billions of dollars in administrative costs. I don't want to be spending my hard-earned money to let this stuff, pet projects without any oversight by the county or the state. Is there required oversight for this?
No, absolutely. It's a great clarifying question. When I was talking about the possible audits, it's of the credit improvements and the things that would be providing a tax owner their relief. So in most cases, when you submit a certified tax credit application, it's going to be just kind of verifying, making sure that it looks legitimate, and then we will spot check a certain amount of those to provide accountability to whoever's submitting the tax credit. But in terms of the revenue being spent, the audits are mandated. And so whether it's the regional program, the municipal program, or even the district program, those are built in. I think it's every 3 years at a minimum to each of those programs. And then for the regional program, it's upon completion of each project. And on top of that, there's annual reporting requirements that they have to submit to the steering committee, to that regional oversight committee as well, to actually say, here's how we've invested the money, here's where we're going, to make sure we're still on scope and on budget and other things as well. So there's a lot of accountability built in that sense, which will make sure that, again, program goals are being met in an effective way. We'll come up here to it, sorry.
I have lots of questions, so whenever you finish.
I'll just keep mixing them in,
You mentioned earlier that that 10% includes about $7 million that would come to the local area. And exactly how is that going to be a benefit to the local area? What will we see of that $7 million?
You're looking at this one actually, right?
Well, you were talking about the 50%, the 40%, and the 10%.
Yes.
And you said we were in the 10% of the Santa Clara River area. And that we would probably see $7 million in return.
Forgive me if I misspoke. The 10% is still separate. That $7 million is the anticipated revenue from the 50%, this regional program. So that's going to benefit the Santa Clara River watershed area as a whole. So runoff that comes from Agua Dulce and all the other surrounding canyons that make it into Santa Clara being one of them. Water quality issues, but other people might propose projects that have other types of multiple benefits. I heard about just today Down the road in Tick Canyon, I think, go from the Tick Canyon, some people brainstorming about something they wanted to do there in terms of water
Yeah.
quality.
Lots of houses.
Houses there.
Big development is what they want to do in Tick Canyon. So basically, Agua Dulce and Acton, because this will affect Acton as well, both of which are low-impact areas and therefore not even required to have a sustainability agency. We've been through all of that already too. And without that necessity, we are still included in something like this. So the question is, where do we see benefit of any kind to our local area for all the tax money that we're expected to pay? I mean, taxes are generally, you're supposed to get something back for your tax money. Where is what we get back?
A lot of that's to be determined, and honestly, that's one of the neat parts of the program is anybody in this room could suggest, here's the benefit I want to see, and ask for technical assistance to start putting that into practice and explore the concept. So if you have an idea or an area or something that you think would fit for a project, that's very much a worthy consideration. But as a whole, there's still going to be others who are looking at it in the regional program, even on a larger scale. So they would be looking at, again, the pollutants that have come from the equestrian areas and other things and eventually make their way into the Santa Clara River. How do we clean those, capture those, and again, use that water in hopefully sustainable ways with the program.
Well, there isn't a lot of water that comes from private property that makes it to the Santa Clara River. What does make it there is the runoff after a big storm, which is rare, from the mountains. And that runs down Canyon Road, Ground Valley Road in Acton, and goes to the river. Acton is the headwater of the Santa Clara River, and the water up there is clean. And what is going down really is not polluted. The pollution that they keep talking about is being created in Santa Clarita. They've got the permite and the this and the that have been polluting for years. We don't have enough. I was part of a water committee some years ago, and we did our own studies because we were dealing with the Water Quality Control Board of Region 4, and we did study after study and reported to the Region 4 board and found that there were spot places where there were some nitrates, but the nitrates vary from place to place, depending on the weather, depending on the rainfall, and are not particularly polluting. There are some people who do bad things, like stack up all their manure, and that does cause some local pollution. If we could just get those people to wise up, it would be great. But what I'm seeing here is that there's no real benefit to us because we have no infrastructure, we have no sewers, we have no water pipes. And we're just going to be paying for everybody else's benefit when we don't create the problem. So what do we do about stuff like that?
Again, the structure having to be watershed area specific still means it's coming to your watershed area. So it may not be your yard, it may not be Agua Dulce in every project's sake either. But having the watershed area divisions ensures that 7 million doesn't go to City of LA or down to Long Beach and other things like that. It is for this area, this community. And like I said, there's going to be ongoing partnerships to help craft what those ideas are. And again, those steering committee meetings are designed for that type of dialogue and conversation. And
We've been having those dialogues and conversations for years.
with those EWEN groups as well, those in the meeting.
They've been local groups talk about the situation, but we just keep facing more and more ideas from the county on how they can tax us to fix problems that are, I'm not sure this is the best way to fix them. The precursor to the Safe Clean Water Program was the Clean Beaches, Clean Water Act. That was a disaster. And 600 of us went down to the board of the regional planning. And, they finally dropped the program. And then this is what they've come up with instead. I'm not sure which is worse. But what we have is another bureaucracy, a huge bureaucracy that forms, that the coordinators will have to be paid, and who's watching the coordinators? And they're political appointees, aren't they?
No.
How do they
They
get hired?
have to submit their qualifications, make their case for why they're appropriate for each steering committee in it as well. And if they're found to not be doing their job, they're fireable. They're very much accountable to the flood control district and the steering committees as well. And those really are intended to be some of your greatest allies. Those are really the ones who are really most in touch with what we think we need to do and develop and those kind of things as well. So they'll be a key strategic partner in all those steering committees.
Give my cynicism, but it sounds good on paper, and in practical terms, I'm not sure that sort of thing works. You know, as one person said, the high-speed rail, what a disaster when we put, the trust into the people who are supposed to be doing things right.
Yeah.
There's too much money involved and too much graft and corruption, and I just see another opportunity here.
Understood. I mean, people have seen those types of examples, and we'll move to another question after this, but people have seen those examples, and that really has been one of the primary reasons where this program is intended to be so transparent and have all these accountability levels built into it. So, the many layers and complications, it's true, it's a complicated program, but at every level there is accountability built into it. And so for my team and all the others that are involved, they're dedicated to, again, stewarding those public dollars in the best way. It means we're going to take very seriously the hiring of those watershed coordinators. We're going to continue to reiterate to those steering committees how important their job is to, again, be in touch with what's really needed for the regions. And the more people that share that message, I think the more that it will continue to sink in. And it's going to be a journey. Everybody's still learning together. But so many had voted for it to pass that it is now our responsibility to try to do it in the most effective way. So you've got my commitment. I'm going to keep trying to do that. I'll continue to speak with you. There's a lot of pieces that are going to continue to be built out, but again, there's accountability built into each spot. So yeah, what do I hear?
Is there any guarantees or protections in this bill that it will remain at 2.5 cents per square foot? Or am I going to be facing, if the money is a shortfall in the next 3, 4, 5 years, are they going to up it per square foot?
Yeah, it won't be us. Obviously with inflation and other things like that 2.5 cents.
Going up.
Well, 2.5 cents will not go as far down the road.
Exactly.
But there's nothing in there that says, because of that, we're gonna up it. It's gonna exist for 30 years. And then after 30 years, there's a reevaluation period where it would just be, hey, we've accomplished all the projects, this program's no longer needed. Or it just needs to be reduced, for maintaining the projects that were built.
But nothing in there says that there's a shortfall if we plan these projects and now the costs are higher than we expected, such as the bullet train. They can't come back and say, well, 2.5 cents is not enough, we need more than that,
Right.
without a vote.
Right, that's correct.
It's written in the bill, it's written in the bill to protect us.
Yeah, the 2.5 cents is set in stone. It's not evaluated again until 30 years from now. And so the projections that come in will be the limiting factor. Those stormwater investment plans, the budgets, if you will not be able to go beyond the anticipated revenue based on just 2.5 cents per square foot. And in fact, they won't even be going close to that to make sure that there's contingencies for the projects, the unforeseen issues and that kind of thing. So those committees have to make sure that they are planning accordingly to not even get close to that point. And if they do, there's no more money.
So what you're telling me is the county overreached asking for 2.5 cents, knowing they can't do anything for 30 years.
No, not saying that at all. Saying that 2.5 cents was the deemed target to achieve $300 million. And it was a commitment from the county to say, we're not going to raise that. We're going to use that and put it to use as best we can for the next 30 years. I think that's all back here first.
This is go ahead.
We'll come right back to you.
So, that was kind of terrifying, you said 30 years. There's no way that this could ever be repealed.
It can be repealed.
Anything can be repealed in theory with new legislation, I suppose.
So there has to be new legislation.
That's my understanding.
Okay. but if not,
It's reevaluated in 30 years, correct, yeah. All right, sir.
This is the projected, yearly income from this taxes, that's approximately $150 million.
For the regional side, yes.
And that wasn't voted by property owners, that was voted by voters. I don't think you get nearly 70% of property owners to vote for something like that. But you got property owners.
The tax
I
applies
mean,
to
you
the
got
parcel owner.
tenants and whatever in apartment voting. A tax of this
Yeah.
projection here should be from property owners only.
All
That's a lot of money.
all the voters had a say, you are correct, yeah. And then that's all.
The way it was worded,
Yeah.
we didn't know what was happening in that measurement. The way it was worded, it was very unfair.
So, again, I can't, I'm not speaking to that aspect per se. It was one of those efforts where, you know, the team developing it at the time had tried to make themselves available. There was the ballot language, yes, but there was a lot of references to everything else that went with it. The ordinance language itself was available. Going forward, now that it's passed, that's why I'm here now, to make sure that you can see any details that you want to see, again, through our webpage and the forums and everything else that we do. And then, yeah, back corner.
If the target is what, $300 million a year is what you said. If the county gets over that, can we expect any kind of a refund? First one, which I know is laughable. Second one is, I'm already paying a stormwater runoff fee on my property tax. How does that figure into this?
So, first question, there's no way to get over $300 million. It's very safe to assume it'll be less, and we won't know those exact amounts until after the credits, exemptions, that kind of thing. Second question, remind me of the second question. You already pay a stormwater.
Property tax is stormwater runoff fee. I'm
Gotcha.
paying $35, $70 a year on stormwater runoff fee based on the square footage of my house already.
So
Where does that money?
you're likely referring to the benefit assessment, I think, for the flood control district.
Where does that money go?
And
I
that-
haven't seen any benefit in this area from that money.
So that's something we should dissect a little bit further, probably separately, because I think you're talking, we can look at it, if you can get into the line item what it is, we can try to track down, but I assume it's benefit assessment from flood control district, which is, you know, really focusing not on this kind of multi-benefit water program, but the flood control itself and the things that go with it. So let me know, we can talk more about that one.
Because, like I said, it says stormwater runoff fee, and if it is for flood control, again, we're not benefiting from that out here. I mean, look at what happened in Crown Valley Road last August, right? When literally businesses were flooded out because of a conflict.
And homes.
And homes.
Many homes.
You know, one of the houses we almost bought had a basement full of mud. So we were fortunate not to get that place, but, you know, we don't see a benefit from that runoff. That benefit does help further down in Santa Clarita, where they're lining the channel down there and doing stuff to control the runoffs on the Santa Clara River bed down in Santa Clarita, but we don't see that benefit out here because our emergency teams will get flooded. We'll have high water running along Sierra Highway, that kind of thing, so that doesn't benefit me at all.
But like I said, I would love to talk more about that and try to get some specifics. Yeah.
Can you just give me an example of a project that would be in this area that would benefit us with that 7.1 million?
There's a few projects that have kind of been highlighted as kind of categorical samples, I guess, if you will. And this particular site is kind of for a large scale, a medium scale, and a neighborhood scale. So obviously nobody's expecting Agua Dulce to put in a wetlands project. But there's opportunities like that Bassett High School and down in the corner to put in a infiltration gallery that will just capture the stormwater underneath a park area or anything else. Those have become more and more common practice. The Elmer Avenue Green Street is much more smaller scale, And that would mean, you know, really just building out, like we were talking about vegetated swales on your property, that would be something within the streets that again is keeping the water from running down the street and containing it there. So the small and the medium, you know, I think there's likely some potential there. Again, there's going to be a lot of people who will be engaging you guys and others to brainstorm those and what might be appropriate.
So when you say swale, you talking like a V ditch, or are you talking like a dam to capture water, or like a pond?
When I say swale, I'm talking more like a V ditch, but any of those examples you listed obviously would capture stormwater and could be used to retain it, infiltrate it, and so forth.
Because when it rains really hard, the rain cuts a path through my yard and I get a natural swale. It's about as natural as you get. So if you want to talk about controlling stormwater, this is it. This is the way nature does it.
Yeah.
It's when you get down in the city, it's concreted and made curves, and we direct all that water too fast into the river instead of letting it soak in. Here, we should be exempt.
That's right.
I have a natural wash in the front of my property, cutting through it. So could I go for credit based upon that, even though it's not dammed, it just runs through, but it's a natural V?
A natural V still is channelizing and running it out. And so, again, I'm really not in the position to analyze these cases tonight. It's just, those are examples of ways, whether it's urbanized or out in Agua Dulce, where you can capture it. And it's not to say just channelize it and send it down, but just, again, the intent is to capture it and put it to beneficial use with the program. There's going to be, again, a lot of opportunity going forward to talk about, you know, credit-wise, if those types of things could apply, and then project-wise, what it would look like to build it into streets or other properties. Yeah.
So, when I moved out here, this was before all of our drought stuff, I got in contact with a little bitty rain garden in front of my house so that when gutters run into that area, I dug that out about 4.5 feet down, got to some DG, backfilled with gravel, put some more sand in there, put some gravel on top, and then put a layer of soil over that. It still has a natural, it still has a V to it, acts as a swale. Now, do I need to have someone come out here and look at that to tell me if I get a credit for that? Because all my gutters direct to that spot on my house. So I've got a, 1,800 square foot house with the corresponding roof dumping all this water into that area. It doesn't run out. Either the hardest rain soaks right in because I let it down far enough. Am I going to have someone come look at that and get credit for it?
Short answer, no. Again, I'm not here to speak specific to all those instances, but the role of the credit program is you submit a certification of what it is, and it's not going to be spot checked every single time. We receive the certified form and the description of it with the pictures and what the benefits are and any associated calculations and those kind of things. And again, we might spot check certain ones, but it's not saying, hey, we're not going to even consider it until someone comes and looks at it. It's all right, well, back to Lily.
Okay, there's an aerial view of people's property, and that was probably from last year, you said, 2018. Are they going to be doing periodic, annual, or semi-annual checks to see if you've added anything to your property, or is a one-time assessment going to be it? Because people out here buy a piece of property and they might want to make improvements to it, they might want to add driveway or whatever, so is that going to be monitored and increase your tax?
So again, it's not the watchdog mentality that did somebody put new in there or vice versa, they took it out. It's just in a matter of getting them an updated data set periodically. So it's not feasible annually. It may not be feasible semi-annually. 3 to 5 years is our estimate now of, again, just an updated data set across the county. And it's not, again, to catch somebody adding a permanent area, it's just to get an updated data set for that calculation process.
So once they have an updated data set, does that mean they're going to alter the amount of tax they charge you?
Yeah, that's when the equation will be adjusted. But if you already have credits and other things in the motion there, those things will go with it, obviously. Yeah.
So if I go to the county and pull a building permit to add a small shed on my property, is that going to trigger it to your?
Absolutely.
He's saying no, you're saying yes. Which one is it?
I think he's saying I don't know.
I mean, I hear your concern, but it's not one of those things where, you know, we have gone to every public counter and built into their job role is to, you know, try to track and catch all those different
But
things.
that will happen eventually with regional planning and building and safety. Somehow it's gonna trigger that I just added a 20 by 20 garden shed.
Right now, the only thing that's spelled out to trigger that would be the periodic update of the area regime.
I suspect if you add a house, that will get automatically taken care of. They won't wait 5 years for the house to get noticed on the survey.
Don't worry about it, because the county right now has put a moratorium practically on building. You're not building any houses here anymore. And with this new plan that they want to get passed at the end of the month, they're going to put a kibosh on all building here. Are you not aware of that? It's called.
I mean, I would love to learn about that as well, so we
Well,
have
just
to,
go on that.
you know, that we can exchange.
The name of it is just escaping me for the moment.
Are you looking to tax my automobiles and my motorhome since water can't soak into them?
I mean, they're parked on
Yes,
impermeable
they're-
surfaces most of the time, so it's not an additional impermeable surface.
Just make sure your truck wasn't parked on your grass when they took the picture.
Or just move it every hour, like New York City?
Tricky every hour, I said 3 to 5 years are estimated on new data sets. Anyway, I'll go back to the back end.
I'm really concerned about this amount of money that's being collected. For the last 8 years, here in Acton and Agua Dulce, we have been diligently fighting what the high speed rail was going to do to our property values. I'm also concerned about that. Yes, the high speed rail says that it's basically not going to be coming through our community. That's what the governor announced in January, but we all know that it's still going forward. The groups that are working on this project for Acton and Agua Dulce, none of them have been released from their job. The EIR is still going forward. So my question is, the people voted in November of 2008 for a certain price that the high-speed rail was going to cost. It has gone from the $9 billion to $90 billion. We can't do a darn thing about it, okay? Here is another project that's going to affect my property values, and everybody else in these two communities, and yet we're not the problem as far as I can see. I live in Acton, I'm not an Agua Dulce resident, I live in Acton, and my water is clean there, starting at the Santa Clara Riverhead. But yet I'm going to pay for everyone else. It just seems wrong to me. I'm probably really upset about this because I've spent so many years of my life working on the high-speed rail. To now watch this come here, it makes me want to just pack up and go. Because I don't know what else to do.
Well, this affects every household
Yes, it
equally. Doesn't
Well,
matter
the
where you
high-speed
live,
rail is
everybody's getting
gonna
the same tax.
kick our
I
butt to
understand.
the curb.
Anything that doesn't go as we planned is understandably frustrating. Absolutely,
And
that's
people
fine.
didn't know what they were voting for. I'm sorry, they didn't.
They saw clean water.
All they would do is read the pamphlet. They wouldn't read it.
But, I mean, I'll reiterate the assurances. We've
I'm
got,
just uncomfortable, everything you're saying is kind of vague because there isn't, you don't have answers for us really. I know,
we've got,
get it.
we've got the processes spelled out. We have a lot of the documents that will detail how it works now. There is gonna be much to figure out as those projects come forth, absolutely.
We saw that with the high-speed rail. I'm sorry, that's my only experience that I can tell you about. Then we had many, many meetings in Acton and Agua Dulce concerning that high-speed rail project. And now we've got another project that is going to affect our communities drastically.
Again, not familiar with that one, totally understand the frustration. Our commitment as the county, completely independent from the high-speed rail, is we want it to be done accountably. The intent right now is to have all these things out there in a transparent fashion. They're reviewable. The tax has passed, indeed, but it's not too late to carry on the conversation, make sure we hear needs and those kind of things. Those committees are set up to ensure.
Those people haven't even been hired yet.
Right, but they have that function. It is required by the code that they look at these aspects. We'll go pink first.
What I see is this project is directly connected to regional planning eventually.
Yeah.
You're gonna be flying on, satelliting your houses, taking pictures of any shed, anything that you have. And not only that, you're gonna have regional planning coming in on your property and every possibility.
Building and safety.
Building and safety, yeah. I mean, some of these places that we have been here for a long, long time, and you have horse awnings, or you have old sheds, or you have this, but you've maintained them. And that's what I'm really leery of.
Understood. And like I said, the adjustments right now, it's really is just when those periodic new data sets are generated. It's not, there is no proactive hunt for this process. And if regional planning or building and safety or others are, end up, pointing people that direction, it's because they're just trying to get a bigger picture. But there's no ordinance, there's no direction. Yeah.
What's the best way that we can keep up with the progress of getting the committee, the steering committee together? Through that website, is that the best way that we can see the progress of putting together the committee and where it's going, and who the members are, and who our contacts are?
Yeah, great question. The website as a whole will continue to be that resource. But I've already got a couple names here where we can add you to. It's really just an electronic email blast.
Lillian is your best
And so I've got Lillian's, but I mean, we'd love to put anybody else directly on there, because that's when we'll announce the other thing, all these public review periods and other things as well. Those announcements will come through that medium, and then we certainly encourage it to be shared again. So the webpage, yes, and you're always welcome to check back, but those e-blasts we will include when those major landmarks occur to make sure you can track it.
The journal does go to every home, so.
To where?
The journal does go to every home in
Whatever.
Acton and Agua Dulce free of charge, so it
Gotcha.
gets there. I don't want people to read it, but it does.
Absolutely. We'll go here and then go over here.
My understanding is that parts of Acton are not affected by this?
Parts of Acton?
Right, that's what I heard.
Is
And-
Acton
And the
in
Antelope Valley.
It's not, Acton is part of the Antelope Valley
Yeah.
sustainability,
right.
the water sustainability plan. And as far as I know, Acton is covered under Measure W.
All of Acton?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would need to go back and look at, this boundary, but the Antelope Valley watershed is excluded, is this hatched boundary up here. And so, I think all of Acton is on that side here.
Acton is not part of the Antelope Valley watershed.
Right. That's what
Water does not flow uphill, it goes down.
Yeah. Okay, and then we had a question over here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, commercial property is taxed the same way?
Yeah.
Unless it's government.
Government is exempt.
Does anyone have any more questions for Matt?
I see
We'll
three.
wrap it up maybe till.
Yeah, my final comment would be, as upset as I am about this, another grab into my wallet, I'm also even more upset that this needed 66% to pass, and yet it got more than that, with only 48% of us voting. And so the problem lies not completely with the county, it lies with us. We did go out and vote, and this is what happens when we don't do our due diligence. And so now we're paying for it. And so, yes, everyone's included, but if the homeowners, if we would have voted, they would never got it. And then the other one was, well, I didn't understand it, it was kind of confusing. I had the booklet, if you read the booklet, it explained exactly how they were gonna charge the tax. And so it's a yes or no answer, same thing with the gas tax. Yeah, the way they worded it was tricky, but if you read the booklet and did your due diligence, you could easily see what they were asking. So basically, it does come down to our fault. We did not go out and vote.
And just to be clear, I completely understand, there's such a diverse opinion of stakeholders out there. There's those who are saying, yes, it's our fault, or yes, they're proudly declaring, yes, it's our win. And there's every imaginable perspective out there. Now that it's passed by the voters, our role is to do it in our due diligence and be good stewards, have that accounting built into it. It's going forward, and so you can always reach out to me to help shape it as it goes forward. But like I said, I encourage you to actively just work with your steering committee to share ideas, review projects that somebody would propose, share feedback on those types of aspects, because that will be how you get to say, here's how my tax dollars are going to use. And then, one hand, yeah.
Okay, after hearing your presentation, I still don't understand what the goal of the program is. What is it that we're hoping to achieve with all this money?
I hear you. As we highlight the 3 goals that are linked to the 3 benefits and all the credits and everything else. They're broad because there's so many ways to do that. If you capture stormwater and put it into a usable drinking water aquifer, you're increasing local water supply. If you're capturing water and cleaning up pollutants for the MS4 compliance, that's the regional board's regulatory permit, you are now getting rid of those loaded pollutants and providing cleaner water. The community enhancements, is defined with lots of different aspects, whether it's, the greening new schools and that kind of stuff as well. But those are also spelled out, saying here's what those community enhancements can be as well. It's in the code, and it's also in those documents that will tell an interested project developer what they need to think about. So in a sense, it's really a built-in flexibility to say, here's how we're going to improve water quality, here's how we're going to achieve new water supply and enhance our communities.
Okay.
But to nail down those specifics, again, please participate with those steering committees. You'll be able to say specifically that project, which might have 2 of those 3 benefits, here's how it does it. And you'll be able to look into every nuance of the project. And then, were you the 3rd question? It was somebody in the middle had their hand up, I think, but no? Okay, one more in the back.
I appreciate the fact that you've come to Agua Dulce. I think we need to get you over Hampton also. And I don't know how to go about that. What do I need to do to get you over there?
You can talk to me. Yeah, I'm still coordinating a lot of this effort as we go forward and implement it. And, we're building up towards that July 30th date, but we've been trying to engage any interested group as best possible. So if acting would like that, let's talk. We've been talking to community groups, but also with nonprofits and cities and others as well. So.
There should be 1,000 people sitting here.
That's right.
Not 25 of us.
Never is. Never is.
I think we need a lake,
That,
Need a what?
A lake.
A lake. All right, well, I know we went through a lot of the issues over and over. Truly, I'm sharing the information that exists. There's a lot of opportunity that lies ahead through everything that was talked about here. So the opportunity has not ended, I guess. And that's one of the main things I want to drive home. The conversation with these 17 steering committee members is going to be a crucial piece of it. Yes, the tax has passed, and now that revenue exists, we all can do our part to say, how can we make it just be stewarded as best possible? I think that's the bottom line. I know you guys all in this room very much want to see it go to the best cause possible now that it has passed. And we're really here to work with you to try to steer committees and everybody to think that same way as it happens. I didn't quite lose my voice, that's good. If we'd got another hour, maybe, but again, thanks for having me. If you think of something later, you can reach out to me. We'll have, again, the other information on the web and so forth as well. So with that, again, thanks, Evan. Have a good night. Oh, and don't, yes, the flyers are up here, and this is pretty high-level information, but certainly take it, some of these